When you picture ancient Egypt, your mind probably goes to the big stuff. The staggering wealth, the god kings, the golden treasures that have mesmerized the world for centuries. You see the calm, golden mask of Tutankhamun, the mind-boggling scale of the pyramids at Giza, and the endless temples of Karnak. That's the Egypt of legend, a civilization of magic, gods, and monumental glory. But what about the other Egypt, the Egypt where nearly 80% of the population lived? Their story isn't written in gold. This is the story of the millions who built that world with their bare hands, the farmers, the laborers, the everyday people. So, for a moment, let's forget the pharaohs and step into their world. A world where your day started before the sun, where your body was a tool for hard physical labor, and your reward for building an empire was just enough bread and beer to see the next sunrise. So, how tough was a day in their life? The answer is more complex and far more exhausting than you might think. Your day begins in the cool, heavy darkness before dawn. There's no gentle waking up. You stir on a simple reed mat laid on a hard-packed earth floor. Your home is a small, cramped hut made from mud bricks, a mix of Nile mud, straw, and dung, baked solid by the sun. These 1 or 2 room houses were packed tightly together in villages, and families used the flat roofs for extra living and storage space in a life that had very little privacy. The air inside is thick with the smell of sleep, of bodies, and the smoke from yesterday's cooking fire that escapes through a hole in the roof. With no windows and only one door, the space is a magnet for flies, scorpions, and other pests. Your family is stirring around you in the gloom. Your wife, your children, the ones who've made it past infancy. The odds weren't great for them. Infant mortality was tragically high, with some estimates suggesting that nearly 1 in 3 children didn't live to see their first birthday. Breakfast is always the same: a coarse, dense bread made from emmer wheat or barley, and a mug of thick, nutritious beer. Now, this isn't the beer we know today. Egyptian beer was a cloudy, calorie-rich staple, almost like a thin porridge, and it was the fuel for the day's work for adults and children alike. The bread is tough, and you can feel the grit and sand that always made its way into the flour. Over the years, this gritty diet would wear your teeth down to the nerves, a painful problem we see in the remains of many ordinary Egyptians. There's no time for quiet reflection. A common saying was, "Let us work for the noble," a constant reminder of your place in the world. While the pharaoh and the temples owned vast amounts of land, some families did own their homes or small plots of land. Still, your life was tied to the land of a powerful entity, and you were a small part of a giant machine. The day's labor is calling. You splash some water on your face from a clay basin, likely drawn from the same canal that also served as the village's sewer. People tried to stay clean with pastes made of animal fat and chalk, but in this environment, staying sanitary was a constant struggle. As you step out of your hut, you melt into a silent crowd moving through the village. The air is still cool, a brief moment of relief before the sun begins its attack. You walk barefoot. You're heading for the fields, the black land or Kemeti, a strip of rich, dark soil left behind by the Nile's annual flood. This river is the center of your universe. It's your clock, your calendar, your provider. Your entire year is shaped by the Nile's 3 seasons. For 4 months, from about June to September, you lived through Akhet, the inundation. The fields were underwater, so farming was impossible. But this wasn't a vacation. Instead, you owed the state labor, a tax called the corvée. You could be drafted and sent miles from home to haul giant stone blocks for a new pyramid or temple, or to dig out the vital irrigation canals. If you tried to run away, officials might imprison your family until you came back. But right now, it's Peret, the growing season. From October to February, the floodwaters have pulled back, leaving a fresh layer of black silt. It's time to plow and plant, and you have to move fast. The 3rd season, Shamu, the harvest, will follow from March to May, a frantic rush to get the crops in before the whole cycle starts over. Walking to the fields, you see the social ladder all around you. You and the other farmers are near the bottom, just a step above enslaved people, who are often prisoners of war. You might see a scribe, a member of the white kilt class, named for the clean linen that showed his status. You're expected to step aside and show respect. The legal system was supposed to be about truth and balance, but that often felt a world away. While a famous story tells of an eloquent peasant who actually got justice, the reality for most was being at the mercy of overseers. If you didn't meet your quota, you could get a brutal beating from a tax collector. It was a common and expected punishment. You get to your assigned plot of land just as the sun is climbing, and the heat is already starting to build. There's no shade out here. The tools you use are surprisingly simple, mostly wood and stone. You break up the soil with a heavy wooden plow, maybe tipped with a bit of copper. If you're lucky, you have a couple of oxen to help pull it. If not, you and another man are the oxen, dragging the plow through the thick, muddy earth. After that comes the hoe, a simple wooden A-frame to break up the big clumps of dirt. Once the ground is ready, you sow the seeds, walking the rows and casting them by hand from a basket. Then you drive sheep or goats across the field to trample the seeds into the soil. Every movement is repetitive, putting a huge strain on your back and joints. Over a lifetime, this work would leave its mark on your bones. Skeletons of Egyptian laborers show high rates of arthritis, spinal problems, and stress fractures, the grim result of a life of physical toil. Maybe the most famous tool you'd use is the shadoof. It's a clever lever with a counterweight used to lift water from the Nile into the irrigation channels. Imagine it. You're standing for hours in the blistering sun, pulling a rope to lower a bucket, then using the weight to help you lift gallons of water, swinging it over to a ditch and doing it again and again and again. While there was no weekend, work was often punctuated by numerous religious festivals and public holidays, which were welcome and frequent breaks from the daily grind. Overseers patrol the fields, carrying staffs, watching to make sure no one is slacking. The state needed a massive amount of grain to feed the army, the royal court, and all the workers on the big construction projects. Your work fed the entire civilization, but the system was designed to take as much as possible, leaving you just enough to get by. Scribes, the empire's accountants, recorded everything: how much you harvested, what tools you had, even your animals. These weren't just records, they were tools of control. The sun is now directly overhead, a merciless fire in the sky. Dehydration is a constant danger, but the water in the canals is often polluted. Lunch isn't much of a break. It's more bread, more beer, and maybe some raw onions or lentils. Meat was a rare luxury, something you'd only see on a special festival day. This diet, while full of calories, wasn't very nutritious. Skeletons found in commoners' cemeteries show signs of stunted growth and anemia. Clear evidence of a diet missing key nutrients. Even worse were the dangers you couldn't see. The same Nile that made the land fertile was also a breeding ground for disease. Working barefoot in the muddy water exposed you to all kinds of parasites. Schistosomiasis, a nasty disease from parasitic worms, was so common its signs are still visible in mummies today. It caused chronic pain and internal bleeding. Malaria, carried by mosquitoes from the canals, was also rampant. There was no real medical care for people like you. Egyptian doctors were famous in the ancient world, but their skills were mostly for the rich. For a farmer, a broken bone, an infected cut, or a bad fever could easily be a death sentence. Life expectancy. At birth was low, hovering in the mid to late 30s. This number is skewed by the high rate of infant mortality. If you survived the dangers of childhood, you had a good chance of living into your 50s or even 60s. Death wasn't a distant thought, it was a familiar part of everyday life. As the sun finally starts to dip toward the desert, casting long shadows, the day's labor slowly winds down. The walk back to the village is slow, your muscles burning with fatigue, but there's a sense of shared experience here. Life in the village, as hard as it was deeply communal. People relied on each other, and that solidarity was a necessary shield against the harshness of the world. Back in the village, the day isn't over, especially for the women. While some might have helped in the fields during busy times like the harvest, women were primarily in charge of the household. They were grinding grain for the next day's bread, weaving linen cloth, tending the small garden, and preparing the evening meal. This would be the main meal of the day, maybe a vegetable stew, some fish from the Nile, and, you guessed it, more bread and beer. Despite the exhaustion, these evening hours were your moments of peace. Families gathered, stories were told, and kids might play a simple board game like Senet. The religious festivals celebrating gods like Hapi, the spirit of the Nile, or Osiris, the god of fertility, were vital. They were sanctioned breaks from work that brought the whole community together. These shared moments of joy and belief were a crucial escape, a reminder that you were part of something bigger than just your daily labor. Night falls fast in Egypt. Inside your little hut, lit by a single flickering oil lamp, your world shrinks to just your family. You're exhausted. The physical toll of your life means that by age 30, your body would already feel old, aching with chronic pain. This difficult, short, and often painful life is the key to understanding one of ancient Egypt's most famous obsessions, the afterlife. The magnificent tombs, the elaborate mummification, the detailed books of the dead. These weren't just for pharaohs. They came from a deep, powerful belief that death wasn't the end. It was a doorway to a better place, the field of reeds. This paradise was imagined as a perfect version of the Nile Valley, but with one huge difference: no suffering. A place with no hunger, no pain, and no back-breaking work. For a peasant who couldn't dream of a fancy tomb, the hope of the afterlife was a powerful comfort. While they couldn't afford the elaborate burials of the rich, they held on to the belief that their hard life was just a temporary test before an eternity of peace. The immense energy the Egyptians poured into preparing for death makes so much more sense when you realize how hard the life was that they were hoping to leave behind. From the dark before dawn to collapsing in exhaustion at night, the day of an ordinary ancient Egyptian was a masterclass in human endurance. These were the people who powered a civilization, the 80% whose sweat and labor carved the temples, raised the obelisks, and grew the food that fed an empire. Their lives weren't golden, they were carved in mud and defined by a hardship that's hard for us to fully grasp today. The story of Egypt isn't just about its pharaohs. It's the story of the farmer in his field with a simple wooden hoe. It's the story of the laborer hauling stones under a punishing sun. It's the story of their resilience, their community, and their profound hope that, after a life of work, a better world was waiting for them. The treasures in the tombs aren't just symbols of wealth, they're monuments to the tough reality that made so many people dream of an escape. What part of their daily struggle surprises you the most? Let me know in the comments below, and if you want to uncover more hidden stories from the ancient world, make sure to subscribe.